Hello, this is Basar. In this tutorial, we are going to see how we can introduce the JSON Web Token in Spring Boot. Again, I have this code repository. You can clone this one, and there are two branches. The main is the initial project, and the final is the final version we are going to do in this tutorial. So I already cloned this one and opened right here. Now we will check the project structure, but first let's mention that the main use case for JWT is microservice applications. So we will be doing the same thing here. So here in this Spring JWT folder, we have these two projects, article and the auth. And let's check one by one. In this auth project, let's check the POM.xml. We have the Spring Boot version 2.4. running Java 11, and this is having the Spring Web Dependency. And other than that, there is Lombok and DevTools, and that's it. I don't have the Spring Security or the data JPA or any database. So for the simplicity, I'm going to have predefined users. I will be storing them in a list. And when a request comes for the authentication, I will check the users from that list and do the necessary controls. Then we will be returning back the JWT token. And let's check the other service, the article service. So in our application, we have this auth service and this article service. So in the article service, we have this Spring Boot version 2.4. again, and same Java version 11. In this one, I have the data JPA security and the web dependencies, and we have the H2 database, and the others are for the development and the tests. And if we check the projects, the auth service does not have anything in it. It is just having the main class. And in the article, we have this package, article package, and in this package we have this article entity. This has the ID, content, the username, and the user ID. So there's no object relationship here. We are just going to have the username and user ID. So this is not going to be dependent onto the user service. It would be having the necessary information in its entity. And we have corresponding controller. So the REST controller is having this get endpoint, post endpoint, and delete endpoints. And the repository and the service for the getting articles, saving articles, and deleting articles. So both of these applications are by default running on port 8080. First thing, let's change the port for our auth service. Let's make sure it is running on different port. Let's say it's going to be running on port 8081. So when we are running both of these services, so they would be able to run properly. So the ports will not be conflicting. Now let's start with the implementation. Let's start with the authentication part. So just minimizing this article service, closing all these windows, and let's start like this. Let's have a controller in this auth package. So let's say this is auth controller, and this is going to be a REST controller. And in this auth controller, we are going to have the list of users. Currently, we don't have the user object. I will create it. Let's say this is users, and this is basically an array list. So let's create user object right here. And in this user object, we will have the, let's say that we will have the ID. We will have the username, and we will have the password, and let's have the role. So this is going to be just a POJO, And for setters and getters, let's have this data annotation of Lombok. And also let's use the builder pattern right here with this Lombok builder annotation. So we have the user object, and let's fill this array in this auth controller. We will do that in the constructor of this class. So whenever Spring is creating this instance, it's going to be calling this constructor, and at this step we can fill this array. Let's say in this users array, let's add a new user, and we will add user like this. We will call user builder, and let's set the ID as 1, username as user1, and let's set the password, this one, and let's set the role as, let's say this is user, and let's call build. So this is building user object, and let's repeat the same steps for another user. Let's say this user's ID is 2 and username is user2, and this user is, let's say, this admin. So we will have 2 users in our application, and we will be requesting the token by sending a request to this endpoint. We will send a post request to this API 10 auth, and as a response we will be returning response entity. I'm just doing this one for the simplicity. I'm not going to create models for our response types, and I'm not going to handle the exception cases, error cases right here. So let's set the method name as this one, and in this request the client will be sending its username and password. Let's add a model for that one. Let's say this is credentials Java, and in that one we will have the username and password, again adding data annotation for getters and setters. So in this request body we will be receiving credentials, and now we can do our implementation. Let's check if this user is right here in this list. So we can do like this. We can stream in this array, and we can filter them based on the user having the username equals to this credentials get username. And let's make this part a bit more readable, just adding curly braces right here. So moving this part right here. So we will be returning true false here, and if the user name, this arrays, we are iterating in these items, and if this username equals to the username we are receiving in the credentials, and that user's password is also equals to the credentials password. So there is a missing parenthesis here. Then we will be trying to find the first matching one here. This is returning an optional. Let's say it is optional user. So if optional user is not present, let's return a response entity with the status of forbidden, and let's set the body as just a simple text, invalid credentials. Otherwise we find our user, So that user is right here. Let's say this is user, optional user get. Now we have our user. So we are going to generate a token for this user. And for generating JWT token, we will use a library. That library is this one. And the corresponding Maven repository is this one. Just copying it and pasting it to pom.xml right here. And also we need one more dependency. I'm running Java version 11 and the JAX-B API is excluded from Java 11. So I have to add that one to my dependencies too. So just copying it and pasting here. Fixing the indentation and doing the same thing here. Now saving it so that the dependencies would be loaded. Now here we are going to generate a token. So the token is basically a string and we will generate it by JWTs builder. So we are going to build a token, and for JWT we can add a body to it, and we can do it by setting claim. And in this claim we can set whatever we want. So let's say we want the username to be part of this JWT. So let's say there will be username field, and in that field we will have this user's username. And we can add another claim, and let's add the user's ID too. So let's get the user, get ID. This is a long, but parsing this one to long on the article service is bringing some unnecessary complicated casting issues. So instead of going with the long value, let's change this one to a string. So I'm just appending this ID to an empty string. So this is going to be added like a string value to this token. And finally, we can say sign this token with an algorithm. So the algorithm is this one, signature algorithm HS512. And we will pass the second argument, which is the secret for our application. So we can set whatever we want, but this secret is important. This shouldn't be exposed. If it is, then anyone knows this secret can generate the JSON web token, which would be valid for our application, and we wouldn't want that to happen. So this is an important part. So make sure you are not exposing this value anywhere. For this case, I'm just going to type it here, but it must not be in your code repository. So let's say the secret is like this, my app secret. And to generate the token string, finally we set compact. So this is creating a token, JSON web token. And now we can return this token back to user. So let's return a response entity. And let's say this is going to be a OK, 200 OK response. And we can just add the token. Let's send this as a string. So that's how we can return the token back to user. Now I'm going to save all these changes and let's run this application. So this is the authentication service. It is going to be running on port 8081. And we have these users user1 and user2 with these passwords. So opening Postman. So this is the localhost 8081 and this is the endpoint, and I'm sending my request with user1, and here I'm receiving this response. This is the token I'm going to use in the next request. But let's see what happens if we are providing invalid credentials like this one. So there is no, the password is not this one, and here we are receiving this invalid credential. So this is properly working and we are able to get the token. Now the next part is using this token in our request to post the articles. Let's also run this article service. But we are also going to use these dependencies in that one for verifying the token. So just copying it and pasting it right at this place, saving it, and let's run the application. So this is going to be running on port 8080. Now the application is running. Let's send a request to this articles endpoint. Let's use this token, and we will use it like this. In the auth tab, we will select the bearer token, and we will just paste this token to here, and let's send the request. And here we are receiving this 200 OK, and the article is added to database. But currently we don't really do anything about this token. We are not carrying it. If we just send the request without token, it is going to be returning 200 OK back too. Now let's make sure this token is valid and this token has the user information we are looking for in the article service. Now we are going to validate the token here in the article controller. This is the post endpoint, and this request is coming right here, and we are receiving this token in the header. So what we can do at this step is we can get the header value in this controller method like this. We can ask Spring to provide us the request header, and we are looking for the header of authorization, and this is going to be a string. Let's say it is authorization, and we will get the token. This header is like this. The authorization header is having the value like this. It is having this bearer keyword space, then the token part. So it is something like this. We need to get the values after this bearer part. So the token, this part, is actually this authorization headers substring, and it is beginning from the 7th character. So this is going to be taking the values from this point to the end. So we have the token. Now we need to validate this token, and again we are going to use JWT. This time we are going to use the parser. We will parse the token, and we will be using the signing key. Remember, we are having this key here. We are signing this token with this key, and we will use the same key on this service to verify this token is belong to our application. So we use this my app secret, and let's assign this to JWT parser. Let's say this is parser, and parse will take the token, and if there is something wrong with the token, this is going to be throwing these exceptions. So we will see that it is going to fail if we try to send a request with an invalid token. So let's save this one. Now the article service is restarted. Let's try again with Postman sending this request. And here we are receiving this missing request header, and we are receiving this bad request because we are looking for this request header, authorization header, but currently we are not providing header. So let's add this out part and let's send our request. This was the token. Again, let's make sure that we get the correct token. Sending the request. And here we are receiving 200, okay. But if we just change this token, something like this one, now we are receiving this error. It is saying this signature exception, JWT signature does not match locally computed signature. So if this token is not valid, we are receiving this failure. So with this way, we are making sure this token is generated by our application. Now we can trust the values coming with this one, and we can retrieve the information, like we put the username and the ID to it, so we can get those information right here and use that information in our article object, and we can update this article's username and user ID fields so that we would be inserting them to our database and we know that who owns this article. So we can get the claims like this. Claims, let's have a variable for this one, and we will parse the claims through this parser, and the claim JWS is taking the token, and we get the body, and from these claims we can get the objects. So there is no type safety here. We will be getting object for our keys. So the keys are here, the username and the ID. The username is string, ID is also a string because of this string concatenation. So we will get the username, and let's assign it to a variable here, username. So this is complaining, let's cast it to string, and let's do the same thing for the ID part. We will get the ID. This is going to be again string, but in the end we are going to set this article's user ID as long. So let's have this as a variable of long user ID, and let's say this is long value of this string ID. There are extra parentheses here. So we are getting the ID as string. We know that it is actually a number, so we are turning it to a long like this. So we can update the article and set the user ID to this user ID, and we can set the article set username to this username. So saving this one, again testing with the Postman. So this was invalid token. Again, going back to here, copying the token, pasting here, and now we can see this article is having this user1 and the user1's name and ID. And if we get a token for user2, let's get that. So this is a new token, and let's use this token, and let's say content from the user2. So here we can see this is a new article and the owner is user2 because this token is generated for user2. So this is how we can generate the JSON web token in one service, and how we can use that token in another one. But we did the implementation like this. We are doing the validation part in this controller method, but we have other endpoints like this one, delete mapping. We would require the same logic here because we want to make sure this article belongs to the currently logged in user. So we must be extracting this logic, and we can do it with the Spring security. So let's first create a config directory, and in this directory let's create the security configuration. We have the Spring security dependency in our application, but it was excluded right here in the main method. So just removing this part, and again going back to security configuration. Now let's implement this security configuration. This is going to be extending web security configurer adapter, and we will use the annotation of enable web security, and we will override the method of this configurer having this HTTP security. So the first thing is we are going to disable the CSRF disable, and the next thing is we are going to set authorization for our endpoints, and the endpoint is this one, HTTP method post to this API 10 articles. So we want all the requests going to this endpoint to be authenticated, and the others will be permitted. So when we are sending requests to this endpoint, the Spring security will kick in, but when we are sending GET requests to this endpoint, Spring security will not be checking our request. And one more thing here, if you have seen my other tutorials about the Spring security, this security behavior was actually stateful, so it was generating a session for us. So let's make sure this HTTP session management has this session creation policy, which is going to be stateless. So let's save all these changes. Now let's open the Postman. Again, sending a request. Now we are receiving this 403. In fact, the token is up to date. There's nothing wrong with it, but currently the Spring security is working, and it is not allowing our request to go through because it doesn't know anything about the JWT. It is not checking our header here. It's not checking the token. So it is finding this request is not authorized. Now we are going to do the implementation like this. We will be adding a filter to the Spring security filter chain. So the first thing is we are going to have a filter. Let's say this is a token filter, and this is going to be a once per request filter, and let's turn this to a bean of Spring by using this component, and let's implement this do filter internal method coming with this once per request filter. We will use this filter in security configuration. Let's inject it right here. And we can add this filter to be running in the HTTP security filter chain like this. We can say add filter before this token filter, and this token filter will be added before to this username password authentication filter class. So in the Spring security filter chain, we are asking Spring security to call this filter before this one. And when a request is coming, this filter will be running, and in this filter we will do the controls we have done here. So just cutting this part from here and pasting here. Now we need to get the authorization header. Previously, here we were asking Spring to inject that value to our method, but now we will get it from this request. So we can get like this. Let's say this is authorization, and it is coming from request get header authorization. And we can do controls like this. If authorization is not null, then we will do our checks in this if block. Otherwise, we will do nothing, and we will just call filter chain, do filter method, and we will pass the request and response to it. And here we are again taking the token part from the authorization header. Now we are going to wrap this part with a try catch, because we don't want to throw exception at this step. We want this filter chain to be going on. We don't want to break that chain. So let's wrap this part with a try catch, and moving this part into try. Let's make sure we are printing the stack trace. So again, we are parsing the token with our secret. We are retrieving the claims. Now we are going to create an object to tell Spring Security that this authentication is done. So the filter chain will know about it, and it will be doing the next actions based on the current user information. So again, in the previous tutorials, we have the logged in user tutorial, and in that one I was showing how we can create our own custom user information. So I'm going to do the same thing here, again adding app user class here. This is a class which is implementing user details, and let's implement the methods. So there are a couple of methods here, and let's make sure these booleans are returning true. So let's have the username and the user ID to be part of this object. So we will have the username and we will have the user ID, and let's have the data annotation for getters and setters for each, and let's add a constructor app user, which will be taking this username and this user ID. So let's assign them to our fields. This user ID is user ID, and let's update this part too. We will have an authorities for this user. Currently we don't care about the user roles, but we can easily introduce that one too. But for now we will just provide an authority list of. We will create a list like this, and let's say the role of our users are unknown. Currently we don't care about their roles, and let's make sure this get username is returning our username. So we have this custom user details implementation, and now we are going to use this one in this token filter. So we will be generating an object app user, and this is new app user, taking this username and user ID. We retrieve these values from the token, and now we are going to create a new object, and this is for the actual authentication of the Spring Security. This is username password authentication token. Let's say this is authentication token, and this is a new instance of username password authentication token, and this is going to take the object, the app user, and For the credentials, we can pass a null, and this is another constructor which is taking a third party, and that is app user get authorities. So we have this user name password authentication token, and we can set authentication token set details with this new web authentication details source, and we will call build details with this request. So that's how we are manually authenticating this user, and we are setting this authentication object to security context holder get context, and set authentication as this authentication token. So we are parsing this token, validating it, and generating this user details object, and we are passing that user details object to Spring Security. And again, in the previous tutorials, we have seen how we can access to this user object, this app user, in our controller. So for that, there is an annotation, and we had that one in our previous tutorial. So I'm just creating the same annotation right here. This is interface, and we have the target, and this is taking element type, which is going to be parameter, and there's also retention, and this is looking for retention policy, and this is going to be runtime, and the Spring Security related annotation is authentication principle. So changing this one to like this. Now we can get the user, this app user, in this controller method like this. Logged in user, app user, and from this app user we can get the user ID, and we can get the username. Now let's save all these changes, and I will try with Postman again. So we have the token here, sending a request. Now we are able to insert this article, and this user information is properly added to this article instance. So with this way we are adding Spring Security, and we are manipulating its logic by using our own token filter. With this way, we can use all the Spring Security functionalities, like we can have pre-authorized methods right here for checking the logged in user's ID against this article's owner ID. So that's how we can combine this JWT with the Spring Security. We can extend this functionality by adding this user role to the claim right here, and we can use that part right here. Again, we can get the claim for the role, and we can use that role in the app user right here. Instead of having this unknown, we can have the real roles of the users, and we can do the implementation like that. But I'm just leaving that part as a practice topic. So the JWT is useful in this architecture. But if we would have a monolith application, then going with the JWT would not be adding any value to our application. Because in monolith, we can access to the same user database in every service. So we wouldn't be needing to carry this user information in the token. JWT has disadvantages too. There is no logout mechanism for that. So if someone hijacks our token, they can use that any way they want. For the security mechanism for such cases, there is expire logic. Let's see that one too. And here in auth controller, when we are creating a token, we can set an expiration. Let's say we have an expiration expire at, and this is going to be a date, and let's say this is going to be 20 seconds after it is created. So let's use this expire at here, set expiration, and we pass this expire at. So let's try this one too. Again, going back to Postman, now sending the request. This is a new token, and let's update this token part in the auth header, sending this post request. This is working. Let's send a couple more. So this token has just 20 seconds of lifetime, and here we can see it is expired and we are receiving this forbidden. If the expire is added to it, that token can be used until it is expired. Otherwise, we have to have a not allowed list kind of thing, access list for the token. So we can be adding these tokens, these hijack tokens, to that list and check that one in the incoming request and act accordingly. And again, this secret is super important. If again it is somehow compromised, if we have millions of users and they are logged in, then if the token is compromised, we have to change this token, this secret, to something else, which means all of our user has to log in the system once again. So if you are working with the monolith application, instead of going with JWT, you can implement your own custom token. So instead of like this one, you can generate some random value, store it in the database, and when the request coming with this token, again, instead of doing the parsing like this, you can just query the database for that token and pull the user information, then let the Spring Security to handle the rest of the stuff. So that's all for this tutorial. Thanks for watching and hope to see you in the next tutorials.